Good afternoon. Is that loud enough? Yeah, I can hear it.
I can hear it too.
Good. Thank you for rejoining us. And for those of you who are here for the drinking water discussion, we will get to it. My guess is by around 2. But we'll see. We have more comments. I just want to start by thanking everybody for their thoughtful comments on, it's pretty clear that we're zeroing in on where the points of contention and work are, which is exactly what you want to do in this process. So you've given us a lot to think about and a lot of homework, a lot of things to review, and that is all to the good. So thank you for your thoughtful approaches on a variety of issues and variety of sides. So with that, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, which is Delynn Ellison-Lloyd from the city of Roseville. Okay, we'll come. There you go. I do sometimes tell people who's next, and I just haven't been doing it today. So let me just say who's after you so they can. Melissa Thorne for the Port of Stockton is next.
Okay, thank you, Chair Marcus and members of the board, for this opportunity to speak with you about the proposed trash amendment. My name is Delynn Ellison-Lloyd, and I'm a senior engineer with the city of Roseville and in this managing the stormwater program. As you are most likely aware, Roseville is a Phase 2 MS4. Mm-hmm. We do not have a TM deal for trash, nor are we 303D listed for trash. However, we do have 1,700 storm drains out of our 11,000 drain inlets that, under the criteria of the trash amendment, based on high priority land uses, would be subject to this amendment. These drain inlets would be need to be full capture if the city selects that route. This means that we would need to retrofit, given the 10% a year, about 170 drain inlets for each of the 10 years at approximately a cost of $170,000, saying about $1,000 a drain inlet per year. We anticipate the cost of maintenance, including staffing and equipment and waste disposal, around $300,000 a year. So combine both the $170,000 and the $300,000, we get right around $500,000 for the first year. If you carry that out for the 10 years of implementation, just straight out, you would get $5 million. But it's probably a little bit more with inflation, so let's say $6 million for just nice round numbers at 3%. That's a lot of money put towards a perceived problem. And certainly not one that has been defined. Roseville has not been identified as having a trash problem to date, and certainly, but if 0 is the concentration that we're going for, then I guess as a water quality objective, then every community would have a trash problem. But 0 in our minds is not attainable, and it will make it very difficult for the city to comply. On the other hand, Roseville is 303D listed for pesticides, specifically the pyrethroids. And under our new Phase 2 permit that we're implementing right now that is consuming quite a bit of resources, we would be required to monitor and implement BMPs to mitigate this pesticide. We've been working to resolve this issue over the past several years within the tools we have available to us. However, this new trash amendment is essentially assigning trash as our top priority, our top pollutant of concern, if you will, as opposed to the pesticides. Given that we have finite fiscal resources to implement the stormwater program, money that would have been directed towards working on our known pollutant of concern will be directed away and spent on an undefined problem. Track 2 is seen as more fiscally manageable of the 2 tracks at face value. However, it is ill-defined in that there are no criteria specifically specified in the amendment for establishing a baseline cleanup or a method to show effectiveness of implementing BMPs. It's hard to hit an unknown moving target. It would be beneficial to have criteria set so that a discharger could make an informed decision as to which track they'd like to choose. Something, excuse me, similar to maybe the rapid trash assessment protocol from the Bay Area may be an appropriate tool. I don't know, I'm not well acquainted with that tool. In summary, just want to say trash has not been defined as a problem everywhere throughout the state. Many jurisdictions have known pollutants of concern that require resources to address. At face value, Track 2 seems less resource intensive than Track 1 because of the initial expense associated with structural devices and maintenance. But Track 2 is wide open and may be difficult to measure and monitor due to the lack of established method of measure. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Very
I have a question.
Sure.
So I appreciate you walking us through the impact in terms of cost. I don't know if staff has access to bringing slide 19 up, but the staff went through an economic analysis, and so I'm just curious, on phase 2, they have here $7.77 to $7.91 per resident. Do you?
Do the math, but it'd be, what are you saying?
I'm
per
just
year?
curious if your numbers are within that range.
So is that saying the total of the $5 million would be divided by our number of residents, and that's about 125,000 people? So the math with that would, somebody did that real quick?
I think
I'm
these are
turning to
annual.
the engineering wing.
Yeah, yeah.
These are annual
Well, I'm
numbers,
an
right?
engineer too, so there you go.
These are annual numbers, correct,
Those
Ralph?
annuals per year?
Yeah.
So $500,000 divided by our 125,000. But we have done surveys, and we've asked people if they were willing to, telephone surveys, looking at the effectiveness of our program. And we've asked people if they're willing to increase any fees associated with the stormwater program, and we've got a resounding no. And we have not gone out and tried to get anything passed under 218 just because of the fiscal hurdles we'd have to jump through to make that happen.
So,
Thanks,
the
John.
Lynn's numbers are $40 per person, as opposed to a staff of $7.90 or $7.70.
Four?
$4. Okay.
Well,
All right.
It's still money. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just useful to have a real world example. Thank you.
And of course, we're general funded, as you well know, and we don't have a means of getting any kind of funding for this program at this time. So our budget, even though we're coming out of a recession, it will be challenging at best for us to make this kind of capital investment. That's why Track 2 might be of interest. We just don't know
Needed to be clearer.
what the implications of that track.
And I realize you're getting up to speed on the trash thing, because it's not like LA or the Bay Area and that sort
Right.
of thing, and so I totally understand that. When you're looking at your priority pollutants that you're working on, is there BMPs? Have you thought about how BMPs for some pollutants might address trash? 'Cause, Caltrans has kind of gone through that, or started that process in their MS4 permit, grouping pollutants, and I was just curious if
Not
you
from-
thought of that, or?
I've thought about that. I don't, not from a scientific method, but maybe for the pyrethroids are carbon loving. So maybe if there was a BMP that we could implement that would remove some of the carbon sources out of the water, maybe we could help remove some of the pyrethroids.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
so you might have a multiple benefit.
so it's good, yeah, it's good, and I was going along that line. The low impact development requirements, for instance, separate stormwater, from the waterway.
Right.
And maybe there's some potential overlap. So you don't have to necessarily do the full capture in all 11,000 drain inlets.
No, it's only 1,700.
Oh, okay.
1,700 drain inlets, and we have 11,000 total.
Oh, okay.
Over 11,000.
Okay. Well, anyway, I only bring these things up just to encourage folks to look at the multiple benefit approach. And
I
we
agree.
we'll try to not get in the way of that forward thinking.
Right, I agree.
So I used the total amount when I came up with the $40. On an annual basis, it's $4.
Yeah, I'd ask another cost question someone asked me at a break, which is, when you all did the cost estimates that got here, when you say the 10 years, are you assuming any replacement cost? Because some of them might not last 10 years. How did
No,
you
we
do-
didn't include any replacement cost.
Okay, so the cost could be,
It's for the first 10 years, we don't know how many.
did you amortize over 10 years when you figured out the per year
We
charge?
amortized over 10 years. We didn't consider replacement cost after that.
All right, so it might, but I mean, even during the 10 years, you might have to replace it. Do you know that they last 10 years?
We assume it lasts more than 10 years, yeah.
All right. To think about that. Okay, great. Thank you
Well,
very
thank you.
much.
Appreciate the
Thanks for
time. Mm-hmm.
flagging it. Melissa Thorne for the Port of Stockton, followed by Kara Bush with the California Restaurant Association.
Good afternoon, Melissa Thorne for the Port of Stockton. I have 6
Ah.
quick points today that I wanted to make.
I love when people do that. Thank you.
The first one is the trash reduction requirements already exist and are working. As you heard from the San Francisco folks, there are other places around the state where things are working. The port has a Phase 1 MS4, even though it's kind of a quasi-industrial permit as well. And in our comment letter that we turned in today, it describes all of the things in the permit that relate to trash. And many of them are like the Tier 2 or Track 2, but not exactly. And they're already doing these things even in the absence of this policy. In fact, they're recycling 20-yard bins every week of recyclables, and there's very, very little trash at the port. So they don't really think that there is a problem with trash. They spend already $900,000 a year on stormwater, and there's no additional funds to address this non-problem for them. So I would echo what Jeff said earlier about an exemption. If you can demonstrate somehow that you don't have a trash problem, that maybe you could be exempted out of the policy. And for some people where you already have no trash problem, the percent reductions are not going to work because, keeping ratcheting down, when you're in the smallest part is very difficult. The second thing is that the amendments seek a statewide solution where there's not a statewide problem. There is no trash problem for 98% of the waterways. There's no listings for trash in the Central Valley. And as other people have said, this forces reprioritization away from things that are the priorities right now. In the port's permit, they have requirements for pesticides, dissolved oxygen, and mercury. And if they have to transition to deal with trash, that's going to be money that's not able to be spent on those things that are really more acutely toxic to aquatic life than trash. Number 3 is statewide consistency is not necessary, and it's not even ensured by these amendments because of the current exceptions for LA and people that have combined sewers. State law created 9 separate regions because each region has their own issues, and they should be able to prioritize within their own watersheds what the issues of concern are. Number 4, this is an unnecessary burden on the port's construction and industrial permittee tenants. The port is not like a city. They have tenants that come in, and a lot of them are covered under construction and industrial stormwater permits. And because this new amendment is now putting additional layers on those people that are already having to deal with new construction permit and the new industrial permit that comes into play next year, they're concerned about having people leave the state, and then they won't have tenants, which affects their bottom line. One of the issues is, why are we using estimated numbers for these things? We should have actual cost data, actual environmental impact data, and effectiveness data from Los Angeles and San Francisco. Right now you're using estimated data, and I think we can probably have some pretty good actual data. And look back at the TMDL that was adopted, or the 15 TMDLs that were adopted, when they estimated what the costs were going to be. How accurate were they? Were they right on, not accurate at all? And that might educate us. And then the final thing is the full capture devices will cause flooding. And mostly at the port, this will be caused from leaf litter and not from actual litter. So the recommendation to avoid this problem is to put in some kind of a bypass in these full capture devices. So they're no longer full capture and you're letting trash go right out. So what's the point really if you're just letting the trash go through? And the port is concerned about additional liability if somebody makes a claim because they caused a flood that got into somebody's building and damaged things, that they're liable for that flooding. And I don't think that it was looked at as carefully as it could be. So I think the concern is, let's look at where there's places that there is impairment. The port participates in the coastal cleanup every year, but the trash that they see is from Burns Cut, and people actually, the recreational users and the beneficial use we're trying to protect are the people that are actually causing the problem. The swimmers and the fishermen and that leave all the stuff behind. and the boaters that throw stuff over the edge. So those aren't going to get addressed by MS4 related issues. So we urge you to look at our letter carefully. Thank you.
I have a question for you. Have you looked at track 2?
Yeah, but I think that track 2 just adds additional things on top to what they're already doing. And if what you're already doing has solved any perceived trash problem, why do you have to spend more money doing more things?
Well, but there's been a lot of questions about track 2 and just how clear it is and how open-ended it might be. And so, you know, with some tightening up, could you see the existing program that the port has falling into track 2?
Hopefully, because a lot of the same criteria like public education, street sweeping, drain cleanouts, and those types of things they're already doing. So if we could craft it so if their program already fits those boxes, I'm just worried that there's going to be new boxes that they're going to have to fill that may not be necessary because there is no problem.
Thank you.
We'll look at it. Next, Kara Bush from the California Restaurant Association, followed by Kurt Kruger from Contact Engineered Solutions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. We'd like to thank you and your staff for your efforts on these proposed amendments to reduce trash in the waterways. We did submit formal comments which will outline our concerns, which include possible amendments to track 2. We would like the regulatory source controls to be removed from the proposals and ask that the board consider a more comprehensive approach that captures all types of trash in the waterways. We believe that a full capture system are the most effective ways to truly deal with trash in the receiving waters, and that empirical data actually shows that bans do not reduce trash in the receiving waters, but simply encourage the substitution of other non-banned materials. For example, the city of San Francisco actually banned polystyrene, and while they saw a 36% reduction in polystyrene, it was substituted with other non-banned materials. So you weren't actually reducing trash in the waterways, you were just substituting it for a different type of trash. And from the restaurateur's perspective, I mean, we need some type of food packaging material to use, and so if you are to ban one, it just means we're going to find something else to use to offset that product. That being said, we would just ask the board to consider each of the tracks and make sure that you're looking at capturing all trash in the waterways, whether it's track 1 or track 2, and not just picking winners and losers when it comes to specific products, because if your overall goal is really to reduce trash in the waterways, you need to look at all products and not just pick one versus the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Kurt Kruger, followed by Annie Pham from Sierra Club.
Good afternoon. My name is Kurt Kruger. I'm with Contec. Contec is the manufacturer of the CDS systems. Many of those of us here know CDS systems for trash capture, but actually they were designed as a stormwater treatment unit and still in use in many parts of the country in that, for that reason. Among others, the city of San Jose has a trash capture unit that is currently capturing PCBs. It captures sediment and other pollutants along with trash, so it serves a dual purpose. I personally work in the Bay Area, and I want to share some lessons I've learned in working in the Bay Area over the past 4 or 5 years on trash capture. First of all, many of the Bay Area people who've spoken today have talked about a long-term plan. Long-term plan isn't mentioned in the amendment, but a long-term plan is a key to having cities, municipalities, agencies execute toward a goal as opposed to doing something kind of ad hoc, meet one deadline and not the next. So I'd suggest you encourage the use of a long-term plan. Another thing I would suggest, most of us here are involved in the stormwater world, and full capture devices belong in the public works arena. So you have to find a way to get this message to the public works directors of the small and medium cities. The big cities have enough of a program that they get the message, but the small ones find out way too late and miss the deadline. So you have to find a way to reach out to the public works guys. I'm an equipment guy. I spend my time working with the cities and the engineering firms to help design the systems, get them installed, and then make sure they work. Yesterday at this time, I was under the streets in Oakland, not far from Tom's office. inside a trash capture system, making sure it was working right and checking up on some of the features of it. I know what I'm talking about. I've installed dozens of these units throughout the Bay Area. And Madam Chair, you asked about systems in other states. I'm working in another state on a pilot program. Perhaps Mr. Bishop would like to go to Honolulu and help with their system. They're working as I speak.
All right. DC or Honolulu? Think very carefully.
In January, it's Honolulu. The history of full capture devices really goes back to CDS units in the early days of the LA program, and Mr. Bishop was key to that. And the criteria that's used today is still what was developed then. The 5mm screen, which was a feature of the CDS system, and the 1 hour, 1 year storm is a legacy based on the capacity of Caltrans inlets. Unfortunately, I think both criteria are showing their age. Our environmental friends talk about plastic particles that are smaller than 5mm. Well, we have systems that are able to capture down to 2.5mm. So if that will work better with nurdles, that's an option that's available. There are currently 2 states that use 2.5mm screens in their CDS units for sediment capture purposes. Also want to talk about the sizing criteria. At the time that was established, no one really knew what would work and what wouldn't, so a number was chosen, and it seems to have worked well. But there's a body of evidence that's growing, and it's in our comments that are submitted, that show that for small drainages, the typical fast food parking lot or Safeway parking lot that has a Caltrans, a screen inlet, you can have localized cells with high intensity storms that easily overwhelm the capacity of the unit for a brief period. And if the unit is of the type that will bypass all of the accumulated trash during that event, that's not good. So the evidence is showing, and we're recommending, that the sizing for the very small systems be increased beyond the 1 hour, 1 year. On the other end of the scale, large systems. I'm working with on a project right now for the city of Livermore with a CDS system to handle 800 acres. With a drainage the size of 800 acres, the time it takes water to get from one end of the drainage to the CDS unit is considerable. You don't have high intensity cells over a large drainage. It averages out. So for that reason, the Bay Area practice is to use a lower value for large systems. And we believe that lower value is more appropriate. It can double the dollars you have available to treat systems. Board Member Moore asked earlier if some of these systems work. There are Prop 84 funds that are being used to evaluate some of the systems. I would suggest that you have an opportunity using existing CDS systems as kind of a laboratory to test strategies. You could, for example, try street sweeping in an area that has a CDS system to determine how well the system works. All of the previous studies have focused on what's captured. What I'm suggesting would focus on what's missed. The city of Los Altos put in a unit a few years ago. The public works director told me he didn't think was necessary because the city was spotless, and it was. I agreed with him. We cleaned the unit out at the end of the first year. It was filled with trash. Still not sure where it comes from. Larry Lund, the public works director, believed that the street sweepers were actually pushing the trash into the catch basins. But in any event, you could test catch basins, you could test street sweeping, you could test your track 2 strategies by trying them in an area that's backstopped with a CDS unit to see what actually was missed, because that's the true test. Before you spend the tens of millions of dollars all across the state putting in small systems, I suggest it would be a good idea to confirm that they work the way we think they do. Contact also offers small systems, so I'm just advocating for the most effective approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for spending the time. Good. Annie Pham from Sierra Club, followed by Mandy Lee from the California Retailers Association. All right. Mandy Lee. And that followed by Dana Booth from Sacramento County.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. Mandy Lee with the California Retailers Association. We're a trade association that represents all the national chain stores. So we have thousands of store locations in California. I want to again applaud the board for taking on this huge undertaking. This is a very important policy that you guys are developing. However, there's an element of the trash proposal that we're concerned about, and I think it's been sort of echoed by previous speakers, and it is relating to the regulatory source control. We feel like product bans would negatively impact our industry in addition to other major industries that operate in the state. I think it's safe to say that we probably agree with about 90 to 99% of what the staff has proposed so far in Track 1 and Track 2. The regulatory source control is that one item that we have issue with. The draft authorizes no more than 3 years worth of time extensions for final compliance for each regulatory source control adopted by local governments. This would encourage cities and counties to ban single-use products, which causes us great concerns for obvious reasons. Our industry has struggled to keep up with this patchwork of product bans. A lot of styrofoam and plastic bans, moreover plastic bans that have occurred over the course of years. And having the regulatory source control component in the trash amendments will only frustrate our compliance efforts on a going forward basis. There's compelling evidence that tells us that product bans are ineffective, and I won't belabor that point because I think it's been talked about many times today. But when we talk about trash and litter reduction, I really feel like a greater focus needs to be put on measures that effectively change consumer behavior, because that really is a source and a critical piece of all this. Without that, banning products will be ineffective and in some cases counterproductive. To be clear, and I want to say this with the highest level of respect, litter results from a number of things, some accidental, as we pointed out last month at the workshop that was held by the board, but much of it results from consumers inappropriately disposing of their waste. I mean, that's the bottom line. Litter is not the fault of the product, it is not the fault of the manufacturer, but in essence, product bans do punish the product, the manufacturer, and all the industries downstream. Apologize, I lost my place there. The LATMDL has been celebrated a number of times today and even last month at the workshop as a successful model. We would also support the use of using the LATMDL as a model for this statewide trash policy. Recognizing that the board has set a really high bar in the draft trash policy. I mean, zero trash, as mentioned before. On the issue of the high bar, I think the city of San Jose, if she's still here, mentioned a significant decrease in plastics as a result of their plastic bag ban. However, based on that zero trash bar that we've set, or that we're seeking to set with this policy, I believe they would still be non-compliant with this policy. So I'll wrap it up by saying we would advocate for the more aggressive approach, and we're heartened that in some ways we kind of overlap with some of the environmental groups in sharing that. And again, I say this last month, but if the state is going to expend this amount of time and resources, you guys have been working on this policy for a number of years now, and it seems that based on the comments from the local governments that this would cost them a lot of money and time to comply with this policy, that we really ought to focus on proven and effective measures that will reduce trash from getting into our waterways. I want to thank the board again for the time and the conversation on this important policy. Before I end, though, I do want to pose one question that's not clear to me. So we do know that we have about over 100 cities and counties that have adopted a plastic bag ban or some form of regulatory source control. Would those permittees, would the time extension apply for bans that have already taken place, or would it just be prospective? And maybe that's a question for staff.
Well, that's a good question. I believe that it would be allowed for ones that take place, but we'd have to think about that. We didn't put that in one way or the other in the plan.
Thank you very much. Interesting. Dana Booth?
Must be shorter. Chair Marcus, board members, you went with a quote of the day. We're taking several, so I've got one for you. The mind is a wonderful thing. It starts working the minute you were born and never stops working until you get up to speak in public.
That's true.
So with that, I'm Dana Booth. I am with the County of Sacramento. And listening to the comments today, and I'm up here mainly for clarification because I feel like there's a disconnect between what people are talking about with regards to true source control, true source control, and the regulatory source control measures that are actually defined within the document. As defined, it comes down to a municipality trying to do a source control measure, which you're pretty much handcuffed to a ban, which is where the ban concept came up a lot today. Where Dave Tamayo on behalf of the partnership spoke earlier, and where a lot of the environmental groups I felt were coming from is the idea of extended producer responsibilities, redemption values, other green chemistry, things that work at a much larger scale, but they only work when implemented at a larger scale. A municipality doesn't have enough economic might to make any manufacturer change how it does anything. And so I'm here to basically try to clarify that to the board, such that as we move forward with these amendments, or that recognition that was asked for earlier with the partnering with the board, is that idea that the stormwater groups, as has been mentioned with the pyrethroids and with the copper brake pad things and stuff, we've always been there to try to partner up to try to make a difference with the environment. This is not something that we can do alone, and it's not something that we can do piecemeal. And what we're going to end up in a problem with is if we go to full capture, then there's really no incentive outside of, you get longer to implement full capture, you just displace it to do source control, because we're going to get it one way or the other. The reality comes to that through some of these extended producer responsibilities and some of these other avenues that are available, there's also funding that becomes available by them, which helps us out, helps us get those things implemented. So I would really strongly recommend, encourage you guys to think about that at a statewide level. Think about how we can partner, potentially even before we go about implementing some of these things that are very good things to implement, but it'll allow us to pick and choose a little bit better where the trash amendment gets implemented, and so you're hitting high priorities and potentially actually just doing the overall benefit for non-point sources for the environment at large by just removing the source. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You know, it's interesting, part of why our stormwater strategy, which is our next phase, identifies it, is to have those kind of conversations sort of longer term. Where I reacted in some of the question back to Dave was just, this is where the perfect can be the enemy of the good. To suggest that maybe we shouldn't do anything until all of that is solved is a recipe for stagnation and non-action. So there's something in between where you have the building blocks, and people have raised some very good concerns on both sides of source control in this context, in this way, that we just have to think about carefully. But the overall larger systemic issues and the use of tools that both influence consumer behavior and maybe raise money and result in real source reduction is a conversation that is only beginning really here. So thank you for the clarification.
You brought up an issue. It was something I was thinking of asking earlier, but for Raphael, have we looked at the economics of the O&M in the LA experience, for instance? And because I can think intuitively, conceptually, there is still an incentive for source control if it results in lower O&M costs in terms of removing trash from full capture or other partial capture or what have you. Have we delved into that much? And it might be an interesting area for folks to look at in terms of what are the economic benefits of source control, even when we've done full capture infrastructure.
So what we know is we know how much the communities in LA are spending in controlling trash. I try to remember that 37% of the expenditures they actually is in full capture systems. Of what they're spending in full capture systems, $800 is the cost of the capital cost, the investment in the device, and the annual operations and maintenance is estimated to be $342. Those are the numbers that we've been using for the analysis.
How, can you repeat those numbers?
So
So
the capital costs are $800 per device,
800,
and the operation and maintenance, the annual cost is $342.
right, per year,
Per
right?
year.
So that, and then so what the question is, and I don't expect you to have the answer, but if, you know, if there's trash reduction and source control, you know, how does the O&M cost reduce over time? Because you're basically dealing with less volume. You know, so there still is an incentive. I just can't quantify it. Yeah.
Great. Do you want to clarify, Mr. Ruth?
Just to address your question. Sorry.
That's all right.
Dana Booth again for the record. Just to address your question, the vast majority of the cost of the O&M is going to be having the maintenance crew go out there to remove any trash. And so once you're removing a pound of trash versus 100 pounds of trash, it's an insignificant difference. It really is. So I would tend to think that it's a marginal difference and certainly not an incentive. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Ms. Pham back? I wasn't watching the door. All right, sorry that we missed her. Thank you all for your comments, very thoughtful. It focuses on where we need to focus, which is the point of this going from workshop to public hearing to adoption. We will read and in some cases reread the comments, thoughtful comments that you've put in. And then Fran will ask a question before we do all of that.
The mysterious Tom, could you come up to the and answer one question that came up repeatedly about Track 2 and whether there were standards or performance measures that could more clearly define Track 2. And since Track 2 is based largely on Region 2's stormwater program, what have you used as standards or performance measures?
Okay, for the record, it's Tom Mumley from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board.
I like the mysterious
The
Tom.
mysterious Tom. So, quick setup. In our permit, the permit calls for performance measures expressed as 40% reduction by 2014, 70% reduction by 2017, and we didn't say 100%, we said no adverse impact by 2022. We avoided getting into, you know, is it zero or whatever, we kind of kicked the can on that one. But relative to baseline, so the dialogue that we had in developing that permit in our hearings with the board, including Steve Moore, was getting away from prescribing what type of BMPs would be implemented to establishing more a performance-based approach. So we crafted that approach, 40% reduction from baseline. However, the challenge that we discovered, and it's not really a surprise, but the reality is it's very difficult to establish a baseline of trash load.
I think so.
It was a lot of variability, and so we came to the conclusion that pursuing a quantitative performance outcome based on a quantified baseline and quantified reduction based on baseline wasn't the right way to go. So our process, our program has morphed, evolved based on experiences and lessons learned, and it's a sort of a work in progress. It's how we have directed the municipalities to report their progress, and we're establishing the foundation for the next permit term requirements, which the current permit expires December of this year, so we are in the process of reissuing. Our performance approach is going now along the lines of partly illustrated by various parties today. and I'll see if I can explain it to you in simple enough terms. We've taken the approach of having all the municipalities map in ground truth their trash generation areas, so they're actually able to distinguish with some rules of thumb, high, medium, and low generation areas. Low, so green, yellow, and red zones, and they even identified very high purple zones. So it started with land use, basic land use and other criteria, but we actually pushed them, and it's in their own interest to ground truth. Go out and ground truth with on land, out in the field observations. And so they've mapped their communities, and then they've delineated trash management areas. So they've created areas to manage trash that could consolidate the various generation zones. Obviously, areas that have high zones you would want to manage if you can. If they're unique, part of the challenge is that there's a lot of, the storm drain systems have a lot of mixed land use in it. So you have commercial areas that also drain residential areas. But regardless, we've allowed the municipalities, you delineate your management areas that make sense for you, how you understand your system and how you may manage it. So so that you follow that foundation. Now we're saying our track 2 is manage the trash in your management areas, and we're looking for an outcome basically of solving the trash problem. So whether you use full trash capture, partial trash capture, or the other things, whether they're looking at source, the product bans, or a number of other non-trash capture things are in play, like lots of on-land cleanups. There are some communities have notoriously bad dumping grounds that they're focusing attention to. Others are working closely with the business community and business districts and engage in partnership with the businesses to do trash cleanups. If you go down University Avenue in Palo Alto, it's a highly commercialized, high population density zone. You're not going to see much trash because it's a poster child for a successful collaboration between the municipality and the business districts. And they have basically the proof there is ongoing observations of very little trash. So now let me clarify. Back to the performance measure, what we've done in the interim, we're saying, since it's hard to actually quantify % of trash load reduction, we look for an alternative and say, well, it's easier to quantify the % of your management areas that you're managing, either with full trash capture or equivalent alternatives. So that's why we're looking at reporting. This forthcoming annual report for this past year is supposed to tell us what % of the various management areas they've deployed, what types of actions, and what proof they have that those actions are successful. And that gets into the assessment, the monitoring or observations, which is there's not a defined toolbox, but we have been promoting start simple. Use methods like Keep America Clean, where you can do recurring observations in areas where you know lots of trash builds up, and see if your actions have been responded. Others are using the full trash capture devices as a means to actually see how things have changed or whatever. But we have stated, and we're intending to develop permit requirements along the lines of demonstrate you're taking actions that are solving the problem in your management areas, backed up with adequate observations that they're indeed working. This includes even use of full trash capture, because we're in the Bay Area in particular, because the nature of the storm drain systems and the lay of the land, there are places where full trash capture and the various types of full trash capture devices are appropriate. There are other areas where they just aren't appropriate because of the existing infrastructure doesn't work with them. So they have to consider others. And but even if you put in full trash capture, we're asking demonstrate it's working, because if there's still trash in the creek downstream, then something else is going on, whether it's due to direct dumping or in the Bay Area, wind blown. So if it doesn't get in the storm drain, it could still get in the creek because it came from the street by wind, and et cetera. So the key is we're now going down the path of demonstrating % of your community that's designated to have high trash, medium trash generation rates, which are built off of the land use concept in in the proposed amendments, but beyond, because we've ground truthed them, and so it's not a one-to-one fit, but it's the square peg round pole thing, but I think we can smooth that out. And we're looking at percent of area managed and what proof you have that it's being managed. And thing with trash is you can see it. And so if we see clean streets, check it off. We also have been able to say you can identify areas that don't have trash problems because of current practices, and we could check off those areas.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you all. Very thoughtful, good conversation. Appreciate it. Anything? Great. Thanks. Thanks, team. Good job. We'll be talking a lot. Appreciate it. All right, moving on to our next issue. And we'll take another break somewhere around 3. I don't know yet. Yeah, that was sort of interesting. I'd never actually seen them. Yeah, yeah. Hi, Diane. All right, this is your last chance. Anyone wants to see what a nurdle looks like? They're going out in the Ziploc bag. All right, I just want to wait for the transition, doors opening and closing to be done. Great. Are you ready for a transition? Great.
Okay, should we get started? Since
Please,
lots of
thank
people
you,
have been
Diane.
waiting. Thank
Please
you.
introduce your team.
Yes, so good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. My name's Diana Messina. I'm a supervising engineer in your Division of Water Quality over the point source permitting section. With me, I have Renan Haragi, and he is one of our engineers in the division. He has a lot of NPDES background. He also used to work at Department of Public Health. We also have Eileen Mentesh. She's one of our newer analysts, but we stole her from a local water district, and she is a certified grade 2,
Oh, great.
what is it, distribution systems? Distribution operator. So I'm going to go ahead and read.
Does that mean I can steal her for the drinking water program now, or are you fighting me over that?
No, that doesn't mean that. It
Okay.
means we need to keep her here.
Another prohibition.
Oh, yeah, well,
Unless you have a nice promotion for her.
okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead
And
and
Marley's here.
introduce other folks. We have Phil Crater, who's our acting division chief in the audience, and we have Phil Wiles, who is our attorney for this project. Okay.
Marley just came in.
Oh, Marley just came in. And we have Marley Wood. I'm going to go ahead and read this text that was given to me to open the item. This public hearing is for the State Water Board to hear public comments on 2 proposed items that make up the statewide permit package for drinking water system discharges to surface waters. The first item is a draft resolution proposing to grant a regulatory exception from specified state water quality standards for mandatory discharges from drinking water systems. Staff has prepared a draft mitigated negative declaration to support your consideration of this exception. to fulfill the California Environmental Quality Act requirements. That mitigated negative declaration is an attachment to the proposed resolution. The second item is a proposed statewide NPDES general permit. And this permit is to implement the exceptions as well as to regulate these mandatory discharges throughout the state. The draft documents were publicly noticed on June 6th, 2014. Then on July 3rd, 2014, we reissued a revised draft permit, and the bulk of those revisions is for draft implementation language for TMDLs. I will present the item, then we'll hear comments from a lot of the folks here in the room that have been waiting. There's a lot of familiar faces to me because lots of these folks also participated pretty heavily in the stakeholder meetings we had. Before I start, I want to recognize the efforts of regional board staff folks. There was a group of regional board staff folks from 3 to 4 regional boards that were part of this effort, and so even though this team you see here is kind of taking it to, through the finish line, I do not want to overlook all their efforts. Okay, so with the staff presentation, I'll be giving an overview of the whole permit package. While I do that, I'm going to point out areas of concern that I have heard through the stakeholder process and numerous conversations over the phone with lots of interested parties. I will go through the continued state board permit development efforts as we receive public comments 2 weeks from now. The due date is August 19th. And then what we plan on doing to go forward for the adoption process. I'm also going to touch on how we propose to implement this statewide permit. But before I start, I want to address this very basic question that so many folks have been asking me and my staff and have been asking you folks directly also. Why is the state board taking this effort? Well, we see that almost every regional board has at least one regional general permit, NPDES permit for these type of discharges. There's a lot of variation. Some of those permits are specifically only for these type discharges. Others are for these discharges as well as other discharges. There's also variation of requirements. Here within the NPDES program internally, we are trying to make much more efficient use of our staff resources so we can focus on the more important topics of the day. This is definitely an area where we can accrue a lot of efficiency with staff resources, starting now as 5 of the regional board permits that are out there expire in 2014. So if we can even save the effort for what the regional board staff have to do every 5 years when their individual regional permits need to be renewed. One of the big purposes for doing this is consistent regulation across regional board boundaries. We have heard this from a lot of stakeholders, especially from the private companies that operate multiple systems that span over various regions and all the time and resources they spend dealing with different regional boards. We're somewhat fortunate here that this effort to develop this state board or statewide permit is actually giving us the opportunity to do the cost of compliance evaluation that we had to go back and do for the sanitary sewer overflow statewide permit, and we reported to you back in January. So we're doing the exact same thing, looking at the different regional board requirements and where in those permits can we cut some costs without cutting value to the information coming forth. But with that said, our goal isn't for a statewide permit. Our goal is to address the basic water quality concerns that we have when it comes to discharges from drinking water systems. The first is toxicity. The toxicity either comes from the chlorine of the chlorinated water. It may come from some metals, from additives that are added to the water, or even from the impact or I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thoughts, the change in the ambient pH. pH is one of the ambient conditions that is a factor of toxicity in our receiving waters. Well, we think that the water that's good enough for us to drink is good enough for the fish. But here are some pictures, and the picture on the left is just normal fire hydrant flushing that takes place on an everyday basis throughout our state. And as that water makes its way into either the storm drain or directly into a water body, it contains chlorine, especially if it travels only a short distance of time. So what we don't see is the toxic impacts that take